What can I do to follow that? I'm afraid back to PowerPoint rather than interaction. But I think, what David demonstrated there is really what this session is about, which is the cloud and its impact upon our organisations is far less about the technology stack and far more about what it's enabling in an organisation to change. So I've got 20 minutes to cover quite a broad topic with you. And how many of you were here last year, just out of interest? Very few. Okay, so I'm going to just pick up from where I sort of finished off last year, really. And I think if we just think about cloud in terms of the multiple ways in which we, to me, it's this sort of blind man, the parable of the blind man and the elephant. Depending on which way you approach the subject, you have a completely different thought process as to how you might think about cloud computing and what it can do for your organisations. And to kick off with, of course, yes, there is a technology, a technical capability, and you can consume it in various deployment models, the private cloud, the public cloud, and the service models in terms of software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and we can put whatever labels we want on it, and we can buy it through various ecosystems that we'll come on to in a moment. But I think the fundamental issue is, and again, David's sort of really touched upon this, is the cultural impact and the imperative of why cloud is really important in this day and age, because we wake up in the morning, we're a citizen, we expect to be able to communicate with our family and friends, we expect to have our own devices to do all of that. We are good communicators from that point of view. We're social beings. We go to work. We're often required to segregate our work life and our personal life in terms of the devices that we use, and we have to collaborate and plan and produce as a bunch of people. And then as citizens of this UK, we expect ubiquitous access to the internet, we expect our digital rights to be protected and all the rest of it. And at any given point in time, all of those three things come together and impact upon the way in which technology can help us in all of the different facets of our lives. And there's this whole kind of consumerization trend we see going on, as we saw in those very good examples just then, about the way in which we can use technology in our social and educational environments to actually have a positive impact in the way that we work as well. And when you get up beyond that consumerization issue, you then start thinking about context as well. So where am I, what time of day is it, and what access to devices do I have? And there's very famous vendors out there that use phrases like free screens on a cloud, and they talk about the fact that when you're at work, you use a workstation. When you're at home, you might use some kind of smartphone PDA or your laptop or Surface, whatever it might be. Equally, when you're on the move, and obviously you've got a TV, which, as you know, with many of the games vendors out there, are becoming highly interactive as well. And what we're seeing is a convergence based upon all of these types of devices being able to give you a common access to content and a common access to interface and manipulate that content. So the experience we have, the context that we have, is equally being driven and enabled by this thing that we call cloud. If you were here last year, you can't answer this question, but rhetorically, the question that I was asking people is, on a global ranking, the UK ranks 14th. On an international scale, and the answer to the question of, well, what is that scale, is one of smartphone adoption. And when you think that the UK being 14th is surrounded in 13th and 15th positions by Bangladesh and Indonesia, skip spit my words out, you start seeing some of the interesting facets here. First interesting facet is that in the UK we have 1.22 devices per human being, which is fairly impressive statistics. We're 122% penetration of mobile phones and smart devices to humans, because we do have this segregation of personal life and work life, and we're often required to carry separate devices to that. And you have to ask, is that really valid, the whole bring your own device message coming through there? But when you compare to Indonesia, Bangladesh, obviously the population percentages there using these devices are still down at the kind of 50% mark. They just have much larger populations than us, so hence why the rankings sit why they do. But the important thing is, in this global village that we talk about, access to the internet, access to technology, the building of what are called penny apps is becoming commonplace and mainstream, and people are accessing technology in a far more efficient and effective way than we could have ever dreamed of a few years ago. And so, we don't ever exist anymore in this island of isolation, and these whole issues start coming into being around data sovereignty, etc., that we'll come on to in a moment, when we exist in a talent pool of people starting as young as 5 and 6 years old, and from any continent in the world. And of course then there comes in, when you bring it back to a business arena, of course there's this issue of intellectual property. if I am creating something and I want it to be consumed by people, but I equally need it to reach the widest possible market, and social media, etc., driving that proliferation, how do I manage and maintain my IP to a point that the investment I make in that, I can actually see the return on it and reinvest it and grow or drive profits or whatever the case may be. So the whole issue around intellectual property is being redefined as well by the way that we think about cloud and its impact. And of course, and the rest of this presentation really is looking upon the impact of cloud on IT, and the fact that IT management itself now is looking at a far more distributed environment. You know, cloud is obviously just one of many viable IT service delivery models available to you today, but managing that complexity between that and on-premise and any other form of IT outsourcing you might do becomes the next big challenge for the CIO. So, is it all hype, which is what we've been led to believe over the prior years, or is it substance? What these stats aim to tell you is that actually this issue that we call cloud, this opportunity that we call cloud, is here and it's here to stay. Because as of the last survey, and if you follow us, by the way, cloudindustryforum.org, all of our research is publicly available. You can download the white papers. This is taken from white paper 8 that's available on our website. But 61% of organisations in the UK, regardless of size, have now formally adopted at least one cloud service. And when I say formally adopted, I mean through the IT department, not a business person with a credit card just buying it for them or some members of their staff. So the organisation has embraced cloud in 61% of organisations. And that's a standard deviation, by the way, of plus or minus 3%, whether you're a SOHO or SME to whether you're a large enterprise or a public sector. It ranges in that 58 to 64% mark. So cloud is genuinely ubiquitous these days. It's applicable to anyone, and certainly this pay for what you consume is driving that advantage where small organisations can get enterprise capability at an affordable price. That represents a 27% growth over an 18-month period. We've run this survey for 3 lots, 3 times, 9 months apart. So over an 18-month period, we have seen the advance of new users using cloud grow by 27% compared to an on-premise IT of around about 5%. So it's outstripping 5-fold on-premise IT rollout at this moment in time. 92% of organisations that have used the cloud service have rated that it has been satisfactory or above to their expectations, primarily because first-time adoption of cloud is being driven around the whole issue of agility. People often put it out there as being a cost driver in the first instance. I rarely see early adoption of cloud being driven by cost savings. You could typically take the cost of an on-premise installation and depreciate it over a 3-year term, and you wouldn't get a lot of change out of a service level agreement for a 3-year term for a similar solution in the cloud. That's not where the savings are made. The savings are actually made in terms of the benefits that organisations achieve in terms of freeing up resources, less focus on maintenance, more focus on driving value. And so what you see is time to market is a big issue for people. Having the right skills accessible to them at the right period of time is a key issue to them. And so these are the things that are tending to drive first-time adoption, but 92% of organisations that have trialled the cloud have been very happy with the results. To the extent that 76% of those organisations that are already invested, so that's 61% that have got a solution in the cloud, 3/4 of those are extending their use of cloud over the course of 2013 because they're so happy with the results. And 77%, so 3/4 of the whole audience, not just those that have taken on board a service, now say that they formally look at cloud as a viable deployment option when they're considering new IT projects. They look at, should I take it as a service or should I deliver it on-premise? So 3/4 of all IT organisations claim that they see it as a viable option in this day and age. We're going to see about 12% growth in new users in real terms. So that's, if you've the 39% that haven't yet consumed, 12% of that 39% are going to consume a cloud service for the first time this year. So 25% of non-users will use a cloud service this year. Only 4% of users say they will never use a cloud service based upon their current understanding of what the technology may or may not be able to do for them. But the number one issue, of course, that continues to sit out there for all organisations is whether cloud is a risk to them because they worry about the issues of data, whether it's data security, can somebody maliciously access my information, whether it's data privacy, can somebody use my data if they're hosting it for me for inappropriate purposes, whether it's data sovereignty, will it be stored in a jurisdiction that is inappropriate to the regulatory environment that I'm sitting within, or in terms of data interoperability and portability vis-a-vis the 2E2 issue. If something goes wrong, how can I get my data back in an acceptable form and ensure sure that it goes into another service that I'm satisfied to use. So as a quick snapshot of what's going on in the UK market, all that's aimed to do is say to you, look, this is no more fluff, it's no more hype, this is real substance, and people are adopting cloud in multi-various ways, and that's what my next slide is aimed to do. You cannot read it, and I appreciate it, but if you download White Paper 8, you can see the detail. All that matters is you can see that there isn't really any space on this piece of the chart between blue and black that hasn't obviously got some kind of value represented. And what that chart is showing effectively is down the left-hand side, it's showing application areas ranging from accounting to web hosting to personnel and payroll. So all get different accounting types. Across the top, it's showing you in the middle sections the size of the organisation from a small business to an enterprise, and in the far right, for those with very keen eyesight, it's got public and private sector splits. And what it's effectively showing you then when you look at the blue and the black is, have they ever adopted this solution as a cloud-based service, either for blue, i.e. it's a brand new service that they're implementing for the first time, or black, they've replaced something on-premise with now an in-cloud service. And what you can pretty much see is there is nothing that is not accessible as a cloud-based service now in this day and age. And it doesn't matter about size, doesn't matter about application area, doesn't matter whether you've got it on-prem at the moment in time or not. Okay? So the only thing I want to take you away with those two slides is that, look, this is here, it's real, and it's prolific in the UK market, and we're not alone in the world, I hasten to add, but this evidence is specifically based on that. So hopefully, if nothing else, provides some context to the whole of today in terms of the real evidence about what's going on in our marketplace. Taking a step forward, though, looking at how and when and why people do choose to put things in the cloud is not so straightforward. Because just because it can be in the cloud does not mean to say it either will be or should be in the near-term future. And when you start looking at things just in terms of the practicalities of how people move things to the cloud, you've got to take into account where you're starting from. Obviously, if there's a brand new solution, and you see a lot of collaboration solutions out there at the moment in time where, by nature, it's collaboration, it's working over a wide area of networks and the internet, it's bringing different parties together, it's a good solution to put in the cloud. But if you've got some legacy ERP system or some unique workflow system that's running that might be built on a proprietary language and doesn't have a suitable cloud platform from which you can build, then obviously it's not necessarily a good candidate. If it requires a lot of rich design activity that makes the file sizes quite difficult to manage over a thin bandwidth of internet connectivity, that's not logically going to be a good reason to move. So again, what this slide is trying to do, and I say it's not, don't worry about the detail, it's more the scale I'm trying to portray here, is that the things that tend to influence people are things like the levels of application integration between the service that they're going to implement and what they already run on premise, and therefore can I run it in a public cloud, a private cloud, or do I need to keep it on premise? What kind of flexibility of scale is there? Do I have seasonal usage of this application? Does that give it better benefit for using it in a cloud-based environment? Is it a higher security risk, or do I have regulatory constraints that I have to take into account? So the issue of whether you use cloud or not has got nothing to do, in my mind, with technology. It's got nothing to do with size of organization. It's got nothing to do with application area. It's all got to do with the practical realities, because we're not standing here today advocating everything's going to be in the cloud. Maybe it will be at a time from now, but that's sort of irrelevant. The issue is you have to make practical and informed choices for your organization as to when is the right time to move different application areas, with the confidence and comfort that actually somebody's been there before for that application area in your size of organization and probably in your market vertical. It's just the specific instances around your business might be the thing that influence your decision in terms of timing and approach. Of course, there are multiple ways you can access technology in the cloud, and we've seen, obviously, that from the age-old world of on-premise, we can talk about it as age-old now, all the way up to the notion of public cloud services with that kind of generic multi-tenancy capability, which will always give the highest level of cost efficiency compared to private cloud, where by nature you're banding that, and so by nature you're paying for certain amounts of unique capability to your organization and guaranteed capability and capacity as well. So depending on how much of the ownership you want in terms of how service is delivered, how much complexity you want in terms of how generic or bespoke that solution is, there are viable solutions out there. that will satisfy every organisation's need. But as I say, it's these issues of legacy, I think, that are things that are going to bring people back to a reality check on what they need to do to move forward. And when we look at that, I think when you look at it not just from a what's possible, but understanding how I consume it and what is involved in that consumption, I think helps start people thinking about the real challenges of cloud. Because to me, as I say, they are not, once you move beyond the technical thresholds of what's possible, you start thinking around the practical issues of how does that cloud service get delivered to me. And I think at the moment in time, all of these parts come to play in some shape or form in a cloud-based service, as you would expect. You know, by nature, there are data centers, large intercontinental data centers from a public cloud environment, and you might be running private cloud in your own DCs. Obviously, the proliferation of apps, like David showed you for the number that he was using there in his school projects. The notions of portals that aggregate these apps and provide permissible apps to your audience if you're running a contained environment where you're doing chargebacks, etc., to your particular users. And that might be run in-house in your own organisation, or you might be accessing it through some kind of distributor or technical VAR, etc. There's typically design and migration services I'll come on to explain. 86% of organisations do not make the journey to the cloud alone. 50% of them require direct services and assistance from their cloud service provider. Another 24% will use services from a systems integrator, for example, to make that initial journey to the cloud. The service management piece, the ongoing 24/7 SLA management, problem solving, is a key attribute. We're seeing the convergence of a communications channel, as explained by some of the sponsors today, and the IT channel, where some have got phenomenal skills around the wide area networks and the connectivity to the internet and the comm settings, etc., and others have got phenomenal experience behind the firewall, creating the benefits of virtualization and how you leverage that technology. Very few firms have got the combination of those skills backed up by the service capabilities that's needed to actually deliver all of that capability to the market. And of course then the onset of mobility. All of these things are components in what ultimately becomes the supply chain. And actually understanding when you consume a cloud-based service, how many parties are involved in that supply to you is an important issue, because if you follow issues around contracting for cloud-based services, some of the most important issues come to bear in understanding who you're contracting with, how much of the service are they responsible for delivering, and how much assurance have you got in that. So whether you're dealing direct with a data center from a hosting point of view, an independent software vendor who might have built an application that's been built as a software as a service capability, but they're hosting it for you on somebody else's data center. You might be using a cloud service provider that actually owns the whole technology stack themselves, or they collaborate with ISVs and other DCs. You might have an aggregator like a distributor fronting a whole load of them to you, but behind their contract is a whole stack of people, and then again, obviously, a systems integrator and VAR who might be implementing with you on-prem. The number of people you can contract with and the complexity of the supply chain, as has probably been explained earlier today, and certainly I know will be explained in a session later this afternoon, is really the complexity that you need to understand in managing, because the flexibility is phenomenal that you can achieve with the cloud, but understanding how you manage and govern it is quite another. 59% of end users at this moment in time try technology in a cloud-based environment before they buy it. They're trying it not on a feature, is it doing the things I want it to do? What they care about is the service available? Is it refreshing at the appropriate rates? Is it giving me an experience that I can access wherever my staff are based, if they're field-based, etc.? That's the feeling of the service, and I would encourage you to do that. As I already mentioned, 50% are using services from a cloud service provider to actually onboard, another 26% are using the service of an SI. The important thing is that there is no one-size-fits-all, and it depends an awful lot on what services and capability you actually have in-house from an own IT capability. But in buying cloud, what more and more people are looking at is, can I be clear and transparent on who I'm dealing with, where my data is going to be held, how I get it onto the cloud, how I get it off in the event I ultimately want to get it off. And I'll say that unfortunately time doesn't allow to go into detail on any of these issues, but just pick up on 4 very quickly. If we think about sovereignty and data protection, I think people are very aware of the hype and the FUD, more FUD than hype around this in terms of what jurisdictions are my data held in. So understanding the supply chain behind your contract as to where your data could be federated to at any given point in time is a key issue, because jurisdiction has a fundamental impact on the Data Protection Act. Understanding that you have back-to-back contracts and SLAs, I should add, from a transparency point of view. So no matter who you're contracting with, making sure you understand the supply chain behind them and that they have back-to-back a capability to honour the terms they've signed with you is critically important. Understanding from a DR perspective that you can move data between sources is a key issue, and be able to recover data in difficult circumstances. Understanding that if you're signing up with a software as a service experience, the data is portable with other applications that you operate on-prem are the key things you need to think about from a contracting point of view. And of course, from a governance point of view, I'm now worried about managing data on-prem, managing data in the cloud, some of that being in a public generic service, software as a service experience, some of it may be running in a private cloud experience. Having the tools, the disciplines, and the accountability within your IT operations is absolutely essential. You remove a heck of a lot of back office IT when you move to the cloud, but you still have fundamental control and governance, and that's something that has to be exercised, and you need the tools to manage it. So in the interest of time, I need to move on. I've covered really the breadth of what I wanted to share with you today, which is that, look, cloud is here, it's here to stay, it's real. There isn't an area of the marketplace where in the UK you cannot see experience of people that have gone on the path before you. The challenge you face in the move toward the cloud is being clear about where you're coming from and the things that are going to determine the right model for you to decide when and if to move particular services to the cloud. But when you do, understanding who you're buying from, what they control in the process, how many other parties are involved behind them, and having appropriate transparency so that you know that they have the capability and the accountability to deliver the service that you require when you require is the key issue. So that's it. That's the news from the Cloud Industry Forum. You can get our details from our website. The information I've shared with you today is contained in a couple of white papers at 11 and 18. We run special interest groups, all free of charge for you to get this information. But with that, and giving a couple of minutes for questions, back to you, Dave.